On the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, the southern end of the Union line at Gettysburg rested on a pair of rocky hills, Big Round Top, and just to the north, the smaller knob called Little Round Top. Neither side had made the smaller hill the centerpiece of their plan. For the Confederates, Lieutenant General James Longstreet's orders were to strike the Union left, roll it up from south to north, and seize whatever ground would break the line. Major General John Bell Hood's division was to lead the attack, swinging wide to find and crush the flank. Little Round Top itself was not named in those orders. As the attack began, Colonel William C. Oates of the 15th Alabama chased Union sharpshooters up the steep slopes of Big Round Top. His men, parched and footsore from the day's march, pushed hard through rocks and brush until they gained the crest. There, Oates received a reminder. His mission was not to hold Big Round Top, but to strike the Union flank wherever it anchored. From the summit, he could see his path, down the northern slope toward the smaller hill where blue-coated infantry were just arriving. What followed was not a pre-planned assault on Little Round Top, but a meeting of two forces who reached the same ground at the same critical moment. On one side, Oates and the other regiments of Hood's division pressing forward under Longstreet's orders. On the other, Union reinforcements under Colonel Strong Vincent, rushed there by Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren's urgent warning. This is the story of that collision, told as it unfolded, through the eyes of the officers and men who fought it. In those hot July minutes, on a hillside of rock and oak, the fate of the Union's far left hung in the balance, and the outcome would help shape the course of the battle, if not the war and the nation itself. By mid-afternoon on July 2nd, 1863, the thunder of battle rolled along the Union line at Gettysburg. The fiercest noise came from the west, where Major General Daniel Sickles had marched his Third Corps forward from its assigned place along Cemetery Ridge to the higher ground of the Emmitsburg Road. His new position at the Peach Orchard jutted out like a bent elbow, leaving the southern end of the Union line, past the wheat field and toward the Round Tops dangerously exposed. Major General George Gordon Meade, commanding the Army of the Potomac, was at his headquarters along the Taneytown Road when word came of Sickles's move. Shortly after 3:30, he rode to confer with Sickles and saw the danger himself. Turning to his chief engineer, Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren, he spoke plainly. "General, go to the extreme left, see what's there, and if anything needs to be done, do it." Warren set off at once, riding south along Cemetery Ridge under a hot July sun. The air shimmered with heat. The ground trembled faintly from the pounding of artillery near the Peach Orchard. Reaching the saddle between the two round tops, he dismounted and climbed toward the bare crown of Little Round Top, where only Lieutenant Aaron B. Jerome's small signal detachment occupied the height. From the crest, Warren's view opened to the west and south, orchards, fields, and dark strips of woodland stretching toward Seminary Ridge. Lifting his field glasses, he caught flashes of light in the haze. Sunlight on metal, moving low through the trees. He tracked the shapes, long gray lines angling toward the very ground beneath him. In that instant, Warren saw what so few others yet understood. If the Confederates gained this hill, they could turn cannon on the length of Cemetery Ridge, rake the Union line from end to end, and force Meade's army from its position. There was no time to return from Meade's approval. Warren sent one messenger racing for Brigadier General James Barnes's 1st Division of the 5th Corps, and another to find the nearest brigade commander. Moments later, the sharp report of musketry to the west told him the enemy was already pressing hard on the salient at the Peach Orchard. Little Round Top, for the moment, stood nearly empty, its crest dotted only with signal flags, its rocky slopes open to whoever reached them first. Warren paced the summit, scanning the tree line, listening for the pounding of boots or the clatter of hooves that would tell him help was coming. The race for the hill had begun. The regiments of Colonel Strong Vincent's brigade, 16th Michigan, 44th New York, 83rd Pennsylvania, and 20th Maine, had halted in a field near the Wheatfield Road. It was late in the afternoon, the air heavy with powder smoke drifting from the fighting to the west. The men had dropped to the ground in the scant shade, resting after their march from the Baltimore Pike. Orders from Brigadier General James Barnes, their division commander, were to be ready to move in support of the Third Corps. The brigade waited, muskets stacked, cartridge boxes full, watching the dust clouds over the Peach Orchard. From the north came the pounding of hooves. A lone rider burst into view, reining hard before Vincent. The man's voice was sharp with urgency. "From General Warren. Little Round Top is undefended. Confederates are moving on it now." Vincent understood in an instant. If the enemy gained that crest, they could rake the entire Union flank. There was no time to consult Barnes, no time to march the long way through Corps headquarters. He swung into the saddle. "Fall in." The brigade snapped to, muskets in hand. "Double quick. Follow me," Vincent shouted, wheeling his horse toward the southern hills. They moved at a trot, then a run, cutting across fields and over stone walls, dust rising from hundreds of boots. The heat pressed down like a weight, canteens thumped against hips, officers barked to keep the line closed. In minutes, the saddle between the Round Tops came into view, and above it the granite spine of Little Round Top, its crest bare except for the white signal flags of Lieutenant Jerome's detachment. No infantry, no artillery, nothing to stop the enemy but the men racing up the slope. Vincent led them onto the hill, pointing with his sword as he placed each regiment himself. 16th Michigan, Colonel Welch, hold the right, just below the crest. 44th New York, Colonel Rice, take the center. 83rd Pennsylvania, Colonel Woodward, beside them. 20th Maine, Colonel Chamberlain, you are the extreme left. Hold at all costs. The regiments scrambled into position among the rocks and scrub, loading as they dropped behind cover. From the woods below came the flicker of movement, gray coats advancing through the shadows, the dull glint of metal showing now and then between the trees. The race was over. The fight for Little Round Top was about to begin. In the woods south of Gettysburg, Major General John Bell Hood's division began its swing toward the Union left. The orders from Lieutenant General James Longstreet were clear in principle but loose in detail. Move wide, find the enemy flank and roll it up. The map gave no name to the rough hills ahead, nor any specific target beyond the Union end. Colonel William C. Oates led the 15th Alabama on the far right of the division. His men were already weary and thirsty from a long march in the July heat. As they climbed through broken ground, Union sharpshooters appeared ahead, firing and then fading back through the timber. Oates pressed after them up the steep rocky slope of the larger of the two hills, Big Round Top, determined to drive them off. The climb was grueling. Men hauled themselves over boulders, pushed through undergrowth, and stumbled over tree roots, their wool uniforms clinging with sweat. The sharpshooters kept retreating, using the rocks and timber to slow pursuit while peppering the Alabamians with shots. By the time Oates's men reached the crest, lungs burning and canteens empty, the Federals had slipped away to the north. From the top of Big Round Top, Oates could see the smaller hill beyond, Little Round Top, and movement on its northern slope. Union infantry were arriving in force, scrambling into position among the rocks. A reminder came down the chain. His mission was not to hold this height, but to strike the Union flank. The only way to do that now was to descend the far side of Big Round Top and hit the blue line forming below. Oates reformed his regiment for the attack. To his right, the 47th Alabama angled along a lower spur. To his left, the 4th and 44th Alabama pushed toward the saddle between the hills. Farther down, the 48th Alabama advanced through heavier timber toward the Union center. The descent from Big Round Top was almost as hard as the climb, sliding over mossy stone, forcing through scrub oak, keeping formation on a slope that seemed determined to break it. At the base, Oates's men stepped into a shallow valley of boulders and brush, staring up at a line of Union soldiers who had planted themselves behind rock and timber. The enemy had beaten them to the key ground. Oates knew there was nothing for it but to drive them off by force. He sent skirmishers fanning to the left, hunting for the end of the line, while the main body dressed its ranks for the first hard push. The first rifle shots on Little Round Top came as scattered cracks from the scrub below, then rose in a sudden roar as gray figures surged into view. Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's 20th Maine held the extreme left of Colonel Strong Vincent's brigade. Their line refused back toward Big Round Top to guard against the flanking move Vincent knew was coming. Chamberlain walked the line, steady voice carrying over the musket fire. "Hold your ground. Watch the left." Men crouched behind boulders and low stone, loading and firing as quickly as discipline allowed. Every volley kicked up white smoke that clung to the slope in the humid air. To Chamberlain's right, Colonel Orpheus S. Woodward's 83rd Pennsylvania anchored the center of the brigade, their fire reaching into the draws where the 4th Alabama was climbing. Beside them, Colonel James C. Rice's 44th New York fought from higher rocks, their volleys plunging down on the enemy below. On the far right, Colonel Norval Welch's 16th Michigan held a short, steep front that led toward the crest of the hill. Up on the summit, Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren had just intercepted Colonel Patrick O'Rourke of the 140th New York. Without pausing to deploy into line, O'Rourke led his regiment at a run down the rocky slope toward the saddle. Bayonets leveled, they struck the flank of the advancing 4th and 44th Alabama with a shock of close fire, halting their momentum in an instant. Almost at the same moment, Captain Charles E. Hazlitt's Battery D, 5th U.S. Artillery, was being manhandled into position on the crest above. Teams strained over boulders, sweating in the heat, while Confederate sharpshooters tried to pick them off before the first guns could fire. When the battery opened, its shells tore through the timber at the base of the hill, breaking up formations before they could reach the top. The Confederate assault hit along the whole brigade front. Oates's 15th Alabama hammering Chamberlain's refused left again and again, the 47th Alabama pressing in from the east slope, the 4th and 44th battering the right center. Each regiment in Vincent's line fought in place, trading volleys at ranges close enough for voices to carry through the smoke. Warren moved from point to point along the crest, urging men on, checking positions, and keeping the thin defense coordinated. Below, officers and sergeants stepped into gaps as men fell, colors held high to steady the ranks. The air was thick with the smell of black powder. Every musket shot came with the risk of a return ball. Every volley bought only another few moments. Still, the blue line held, rooted among the rocks, firing by company and refusing to give the enemy the break they needed. Little Round Top was now fully engaged, and neither side showed the slightest sign of yielding. The fight on Little Round Top had been raging for nearly an hour when the Coston leaders began to mount. The steep, broken ground turned every movement into an exposure, every command into a risk. On the brigade's right, the 16th Michigan was under savage pressure from the 4th and 44th Alabama pushing through the saddle. Colonel Strong Vincent, refusing to direct from the rear, moved forward on foot to rally the regiment. He mounted a boulder in full view, sword in hand, shouting for the men to hold. A bullet struck high in his groin, tearing through. He fell into the arms of nearby soldiers, his face pale but resolute. They carried him toward the rear, knowing the wound was mortal. Above the right flank, Colonel Patrick O'Rourke and his 140th New York were driving hard into the Confederate advance. O'Rourke led from the front, urging the left wing of his regiment down a rocky spur toward the saddle. As he turned to call his men forward, a bullet caught him at the base of the neck. He collapsed instantly, dead before he struck the ground. For a moment the line wavered, then the New Yorkers surged ahead in a roar of return fire. Near the crest, Brigadier General Stephen H. Weed, commander of the 3rd Brigade, 2nd Division, 5th Corps, was directing Hazlett's artillery fire when a sharpshooter's ball slammed into his chest. As Captain Charles E. Hazlett knelt beside him, trying to catch his last words over the crash of guns, another bullet struck Hazlett in the head, killing him instantly. Men of Battery D dragged their fallen captain clear and closed in to work the guns, their muzzles still hot. The loss of so many leaders in so short a span could have broken the defense. Instead, junior officers and veteran sergeants stepped forward without hesitation. In the 16th Michigan, company commanders took the line. In the 44th New York and 83rd Pennsylvania, color bearers planted their flags in the rocks and fought from beside them. On the extreme left, Chamberlain's 20th Maine was still refusing its flank against Oates' persistent attempts to get around it. The Alabamians came in smaller rushes now, their lines frayed by heat, thirst, and the steady fire of the Maine men. But they were not yet done. Smoke curled among the boulders and oaks, blotting the sun to a pale disk. Orders had to be given by touch or gesture. Musket barrels were fouled and hot to the hand. Still, the blue line clung to the slope, driven now as much by grim will as by command. Little Round Top had not been taken, but the fight was far from over. By early evening on July 2, 1863, the slopes on the far left of Little Round Top were littered with bodies, dropped muskets, and splintered brush. Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's 20th Maine had been holding its refused flank for nearly 2 hours, facing repeated rushes from Colonel William C. Oates' 15th Alabama. Ammunition was nearly gone. Men passed cartridges down the line one by one, each soldier counting what was left in his pouch. Some had only a handful, a few had none. Every volley had to count. The Alabamians showed the same exhaustion. Oates' men had marched since morning in the July heat, fought uphill through rocks and timber, and gone without water for hours. Still they came on, probing Chamberlain's left, seeking a way around it. Chamberlain saw the danger. One more solid push could break his own line. Falling back was not an option. There was no ground behind to give without opening the entire Union flank. He walked the line, stepping over boulders and wounded men, speaking in low, steady tones. "Fix bayonets." The words moved from company to company. Steel clinked into place. The left wing of the regiment, already bent back toward Big Round Top, formed the hinge. Chamberlain intended to swing it forward in a great arc, sweeping the slope clear and ending the fight in one motion. He gave the signal. The left surged first, men shouting as they rushed downhill. The center and right followed, the hinge straightening into a charging line. Some fired their last cartridges at point-blank range, others went in with cold steel. The shock was immediate. The Alabamians, expecting another defensive volley, were hit instead by a wall of advancing bayonets. Some stood and fought, some fired hurriedly, and others turned for the cover of the rocks and trees. On Chamberlain's right, the 83rd Pennsylvania advanced in step, their volleys flanking Oates' men as they fell back. The 44th New York pushed forward from higher ground, driving the remaining Confederates in the saddle toward Big Round Top shadow. The charge rolled down the slope, gathering speed. Clusters of gray were cut off and surrendered. Others melted into the woods, dropping muskets as they ran. The 20th Maine halted only after advancing well beyond its original position, panting in the evening heat. They had no illusions about the cost. The slope behind them was still strewn with their own dead and wounded. But the enemy was gone, and the Union left flank, at least for this day, was secure. The echoes of the 20th Maine's charge still clung to the slopes of Little Round Top when the firing faded into an uneasy quiet. Evening shadows crept up from the valley, stretching over the boulders and tangled brush where men lay, some groaning for water, others still and silent. Powder smoke hung in pockets among the rocks, stirred only by the faint breeze that came with the setting sun. Colonel Strong Vincent had already been carried from the field with a mortal wound. Colonel Patrick O'Rourke lay dead where his regiment had fought in the saddle. Captain Charles Hazlett was gone, killed beside his guns, and Brigadier General Stephen Weed would not see the morning. The cost of holding Little Round Top had been high, but the line remained unbroken. Chamberlain's 20th Maine stood farther forward than where the fight had begun, their charge having swept the 15th Alabama from the slope. Men leaned on their muskets, faces blackened with powder, uniforms torn and damp with sweat. Cartridge boxes were nearly empty. Few spoke, most simply looked down the hillside they had defended and now held. As the light faded, orders came from higher command: secure Big Round Top before nightfall. If the enemy occupied it under cover of darkness, they could threaten the Union flank again at dawn. Chamberlain gathered the remnants of his regiment, tired men who had been under fire for hours, and turned them uphill toward the larger, steeper mountain. The climb was slow. Loose rock shifted underfoot, tree roots caught at boots. No shots came from above. The Confederates had fallen back too far to contest the summit in the dark. At the crest, the Maine men found only boulders and thick timber. They posted pickets among the rocks and settled in for the night without fires. Below them, the rest of Vincent's brigade tended to the wounded and gathered the fallen. On Little Round Top's crest, the silhouettes of Hazlett's remaining guns stood against the dim western sky, muzzles still pointed toward the southern approaches. From the dark slopes of Big Round Top, Union pickets could hear occasional movements in the woods below, Confederate details shifting position, perhaps tending to their own casualties, but no attempt came to retake the height. By full dark, the Army of the Potomac's left flank rested behind secure lines from Big Round Top to Cemetery Hill. Little Round Top, taken in the nick of time and held at a terrible price, would be theirs when the sun rose again. It is speculation, but worth the exercise. Had Confederate infantry seized Little Round Top late on July 2nd, they would have held a commanding perch over the southern end of the Union line. Even without artillery in place that evening, the very presence of enemy infantry so close to the Union flank would have forced General George G. Meade to reconsider his position. At dawn on July 3rd, with fresh daylight and time to drag guns to the crest, Confederate fire could have swept portions of Cemetery Ridge and the Taneytown Road, making the Union position far less tenable. A Confederate foothold there might have compelled Meade to pull back to shorter, more defensible lines east of town. Such a withdrawal, under pressure, would almost certainly have been recorded as a Southern victory. The morale shock in the North would have been severe, coming in the same summer that Confederate armies threatened both Pennsylvania and the Mississippi Valley. Political consequences might have followed quickly. In Washington, Democratic opponents of the war could have pressed harder for negotiations, arguing that further bloodshed was futile. Had such pressure succeeded, the United States might have fractured permanently, leaving two nations on the continent. The long reach of that moment is difficult to measure. A divided America in the decades ahead might have lacked the industrial and military weight to tip the scales in the global wars of the 20th century. Without a unified United States, the defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan could have taken far longer, or taken a very different shape altogether. History unfolded otherwise. On that hot July afternoon, Union troops reached Little Round Top first and held it. The rocky crest became more than a hill. It became a narrow hinge in time, where minutes of determined resistance helped keep a nation whole.